Welcome to another episode of our Pirkei Avot series on the Rambam's commentary and others. And we're motoring on with the first parak, and now we're going to Mishna Daled. So here we're going to discuss the Zugot, the pairs of sages. One was the head of the Av Bet Din, and one was the head of the Sanhedrin, the Nasi, and the head of who was the head of the Sanhedrin, and the Av Bet Din, which is the head of the Bet Din. So we would like to dedicate this episode, as always, in memory of Levy ben Moshe Esther and Elisheva bat Levy, but also in memory of my father Yehuda ben Moshe Esther. Okay, Michael, take it away.
So, in this Mishnah, we encounter the first pairs. Now we're going to go through a few Mishnahs that deal with pairs of people as opposed to single people, individuals. And in this Mishnah, Mishnah 4, we are dealing with Yossi ben Yoezer, a man of Zereda, and Yossi ben Yochanan, a man of Yerushalayim. So I'll go through the Mishnah very quickly now, and then we'll discuss it.
Oh, by the way, we should emphasize here, if you have a Pirkei Avot, which is found in most Sidurim, you should follow along with us. Chapter 1, Mishnah 4.
So, Yossi ben Yoezer, Ish Zereda, Yossi ben Yochanan, Ish Yerushalayim. Yossi ben Yoezer, a man of Zereda, and Yossi ben Yochanan, a man of Yerushalayim. Kiblu mehem, received the oral tradition from them, i.e. Shimon the righteous and Antigonus, who we mentioned in the last Mishnah. Yossi ben Yoezer, Ish Zereda Omer, Yehi veitcha bet va'ad lachachamim. Yosef ben Yoezer used to say, let your house be a house of meeting for chachamim, for sages. V'hevi mitabek be'afa raglehem, and sit in the very dust of their feet. V'hevi shoter betzama et devorehem, and drink in their words with thirst. So the message here is to allow your house to be open, to be a meeting place for sages and wise people. Be accustomed to having an open house for sages, and you should sit in the dust of their feet. In other words, be humble and learn from them, and drink in their words with thirst. So we'll give Rambam's commentary on a meeting house. So Rambam talks about a meeting house, a house of meeting, meaning to say that you should make your house always available for the gathering of sages, like in synagogues and houses of study, such that if a man says to his fellow, where can I meet with you, where can I confer with you, he will answer him, in the house of so-and-so. So that's Rambam's commentary on this Mishnah. So what is a house, a meeting place for sages? You should do it for one reason as well. Another reason, you should show your children and your family, be an example of how open your house should be to sages. And what if you cannot, or if you're not in a situation where you can attract Chachamim to your house, you must fill your house with books written by Chachamim and any sort of reading literature. That's also another way of being a meeting place in your house for great sages.
Make sure you open them and learn from them as well.
Yes, exactly, exactly. The Tosafot Yom Tov, who was another commentator that I'd like to quote as an interesting commentary on this Mishnah.
Right, so let me maybe mention a little bit of potted history about the Tosafot Yom Tov. His name was Rav Gershon Shaul Yom Tov Lipman ben Natan Heller, and he was a Levy. So he was a Talmud of the Maharal at one point. He wrote a commentary called Tosfot Yom Tov, which you can find. We study it to this day. He was a tremendous Talmud Chacham. In 1643, he was became the Av Beit Din in Krakow, which is Poland. And yeah, he was alive during the whole Khmelnytsky, however you pronounce his name, 1648, 1649, and which is a terrible, tumultuous time for the Jewish people. And ultimately, the Tosfot Yom Tov passed away in 1654.
Okay, so what does he say about this Mishnah? He talks about Yossi ben Yoezer. He's saying all the Tanaim mentioned in this chapter are pairs. So and so and so and so received the tradition from so and so and so and so. The first one in the pair was the Nasi, and the second was the Av Bet Din, as you mentioned, Mashiach, per the Mishnah in Chagiga 2:2. Tosfot, commentating on the Talmud, writes in the name of the Jerusalem Talmud that the period of Yossi ben Yoezer and Yossi ben Yochanan saw the first unresolved legal dispute in Israel. Based on this, I say that no pairs preceding them are mentioned because there was one head in each generation and he had no competing peer. Whereas starting with them, as the quote, rope was unraveled, end quote, and there were two leaders. Even so, the Torah of each was authentic, and they had each received the tradition, and the disputes had each received the tradition, and the disputes arose only concerning decisions that depended on reasoning, or that had to be resolved through one of the 13 rules of interpretation, as Rambam writes at length in his introduction to the Mishna. He also comments on the statement, received the tradition from them, as we read in the Mishnah. Ramah explains them as referring to Shimon and Antigonus. Rabbi Yosef ibn Nachmias, quoted in Midrash Shmuel, writes that they first studied under Shimon the Righteous, who died before they had completed their studies. They then went and studied under Antigonus, who held the post of Shimon HaTzadik until his death. They in turn filled his position. But what Midrash Shmuel writes in the name of Rabbi Yehuda Lauma, that it was actually their contemporaries who received the tradition from them, and that this is how one might read each instance of receiving in this chapter. This seems quite dubious, for even though there is some slight support for this reading from the fact that the Mishnah does not explicitly say they received the tradition from Shimon and Antigonus, the way it says earlier of Antigonus that he received the tradition from Shimon, on the whole, this interpretation is quite unlikely. First of all, it would be strange to mention that others received the tradition from them while not mentioning that they received the tradition themselves. Secondly, the Tana's main point in mentioning the tradition is to show that the chain of tradition starts at Sinai and passes from scholar to scholar down to this author, whose work is a compilation of their dicta, and there are versions that have come from him in the text. Midrash Shmuel writes in the name of Rashbatz that this version is the most accurate, provided its authenticity can be established. And he comments on the statement, and seat yourself in the dust at their feet. So he says, Rav writes, in the alternate explanation he offers, that you should sit on the earth at their feet, as the custom was that the master would sit on a bench and the students would sit at his feet on the ground. This does not contradict his comments on the Mishnah in Sota 9:15, that until the death of Rabban Gamliel, they would study Torah standing. For here, the Mishnah simply means to say that if they chose to sit, the custom was the master would sit on a bench and the students would sit on the earth at his feet. Neither does the Mishnah in Sota mean that it was forbidden for them to sit and they would only study standing, only that there was great vigor then, and that they would learn while standing in honor of the Torah. And the Mishnah here delineates what the custom was, should it have that they would sit, as for instance when they spent long hours in the Beis HaMidrash? Or alternatively, we can answer using Rava's approach to the contradiction between the verse, and I quote from Deuteronomy 9:9, and I sat on the mountain, and also the verse in Deuteronomy 10:10, and I stood on the mountain, in Megillah 21a. Rava there explains that for things that were easier to grasp, Moshe Rabbeinu would stand, and for things that were harder to grasp, Moshe would sit. And the students are certainly no better than Moses learning from Hashem.
Yeah.
And he goes on to comment on the concept of drinking thirstily, as is mentioned in the Mishna. So Rav says, like a thirsty man drinking to satiate himself, not like a sated man who has no desire for food and turns down even delicacies and sweets. So also Rashi, it seems that their version reads ketzameh, like a thirsty man, with a kaf. And in fact, Midrash Shmuel quotes Rav Yosef ibn Nachmiah saying, in a Jerusalemite edition of the entire Mishnah, the text reads ketzameh with a kaf. Both versions mean the same thing, that you should drink up their words with the same desire. A thirsty man has to drink water. So that's Tosfot Yom Tov on this Mishnah. In addition to that, we also understand that water is an analogy for Torah in many, many places. It's an interesting thing that water is immediately infused in you once you take it inside you. It needs no preparation. You don't have to cut anything. You don't have to prepare it in any way. It's immediately, and there's nothing like water when you are very, very thirsty. You would turn down anything. If you are dying of thirst, if someone turns up with a steak, you wouldn't, you would, all you want is the water. All you want is the water. And there's no feeling like quenching your thirst. The same with Torah. There is no more natural thing to infuse into your being that would invigorate you, invigorate your shana, than water. It's a very, very good analogy. And so that's unless there's something you want to add to this Mishnah.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. No, it's interesting. Now we're going to have this pattern of the Zugot. We're going to have in each Mishnah now the successive Av Beit Din and the what was the other one? The Hell of the Sanhedrin. Going through the next few Mishnayot. And next week we will be doing Yossi ben Yochanan, what he said himself. And there we go. Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. And we will see you, Bezrat Hashem, next time.